Welcome to the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Anita Brooks, and here you'll find teaching topics, interviews, conversations, and coaching tips, all designed to help you level up. We all lead someone. The question is, are we leading well, exceptionally well? So join me on a quest, not for perfection, but absolutely for exceptional leadership. Welcome back, exceptional leaders. I am so excited today to have a guest, Liz Kislik. And this woman is a powerhouse. She's a management consultant, executive coach, TEDx speaker, and a contributor to the Harvard Business Review and Forbes. She is amazing, and I can't wait to dig into all the great information she's going to share with us. But Liz is also the author of the Workplace Wisdom blog. So I encourage you to go look Liz up. At the end of the podcast, we'll talk about where you can find more information on her. But she offers many valuable perspectives and tips for developing leaders, managing teams, and improving the customer experience. So let's dig in and welcome Liz.
Anita, thanks so much. That was really a lovely introduction.
Well, I'm quite impressed. And when I was, reading all the information, all the things that you've done, that's impressive in its own right. But what even more made me excited was I feel like there's an alignment in our thinking. And I always look for that with guests that I bring onto the show. I'm very careful. I don't just invite anyone to be on this podcast because I want our listeners to glean the very most they possibly can. Because again, this podcast is not just about leadership, but it's leadership done exceptionally well. And I know you're going to speak into that today.
I hope so.
Awesome. So my first question for you, Liz, is this. What first spurred your passion for working with leaders and workplace teams?
I have to say it wasn't really intentional. It's more that I like things to be accomplished, done well. I like work to go well. And as a young person coming up, there was so much that didn't go well. And it was really frustrating to me to see all kinds of waste or things that looked stupid. And so being very curious, I paid a lot of attention to what did go well, what didn't go well, and what were the conditions under which that happened. And so often it had something to do with the leader involved.
Oh, of course. And one thing I just heard you say, again, this is something we have in common, and I'll word it a bit differently, but I think it's the same thinking, and that is you look for patterned problems, or you observed and noticed patterned problems. And that's something that I work very hard to do in my business coaching as well, because we can invest a lot of emotional energy on a one-off situation that frankly is probably never going to happen again, or doesn't even have that much impact or influence on the organization. But it's the patterned issues that I feel like we need to pay the most attention to. What do you think about that?
I agree 100%. And pattern recognition not only lets you figure out what to work on, where to expend your resources, but also helps you see where a change can really make a difference.
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree with that statement. So, Liz, in your estimation and from your vast experience, what do you think distinguishes exceptional leaders from mediocre managers? And why do you think that should make any kind of a difference?
Okay, so in the debate about leaders versus managers, I do think that all good leaders also manage, and good managers also lead. But taking your construct, exceptional leaders are looking at the big picture. They're looking at the long term. They are not just focused, exactly as you said, on the one thing that's happening that's never going to happen again, or that's very annoying but meaningless, those kinds of things. They know how to zoom out, and they are curious about why things happen and what could be better. I think the mediocre manager instead is looking at, you know how we say ignoring the forest for the trees? Mm-hmm. The mediocre manager is looking at the bark.
I love that.
They're so close up that they're not looking at the ramifications of the choices they make. So they can sometimes take precipitous action or take no action without understanding the natural consequences of what they're doing, how other people will be affected. They're not that good at making decisions. So big picture, long-term focus on the one hand, and on the other hand, only what is bothering me right this minute.
There is so much I want to unpack in what you just said. And so I hope I don't forget any of it. Okay. First and foremost, I agree with you. I do think that exceptional leaders also must be good managers. There's a distinction between the two, but I think we've given managers a bad rap. Now, I use the term mediocre managers or mediocre management with intentionality, because I do believe that we have far too many of those. But I think an exceptional leader knows and understands that they need to manage processes. They need to manage projects or products. They need to manage people. They need to manage everything that's impacting the bottom line of that business. And if you have a leader who does not understand that, they miss that important aspect, then there are going to be operational issues that can drain money, time, and energy from that organization and their people. So I'm really glad you made that distinction. And I think that there are many managers who are exceptional leaders. They don't maybe necessarily define themselves that way, but they are, and they just do it organically and naturally. And I love seeing the marriage of the two. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up. But another point that you made was the curiosity. I love that you mentioned that. You know, human curiosity is one of the most powerful driving forces in humanity. It's a lot of what makes the world go round. Why do we read a good book and keep turning the pages? Because there's some level of human curiosity that's triggered in that. But exceptional leaders also use their human curiosity in effective ways for the organization's benefits and for the people that they lead for their benefit as well. So that human curiosity factor, they don't shy away from it. They're not afraid of it. As a matter of fact, they explore it and they go deeper. And some people will even accuse them of going down rabbit trails, but sometimes you find some really cool things down rabbit trails. It's just having the wisdom to know when to pull back or come back and when to explore a little bit further. And I think exceptional leaders have that ability. Go ahead.
Can I pick up on that? Because I so agree with the point you just made that exceptional leadership is not fixed. It's situational. They adapt to the nature of the situation. A manager who's an exceptional leader is limited by the level of hierarchy they're at, by the amount of authority they have. Those are the things that limit any middle manager, no matter how gifted they may be. But a really senior leader needs to have simultaneously the ability to understand operations and the pros and cons of any decision, and also have a big vision for what's supposed to be happening, for what would be optimal. It's hard to get to that place without curiosity. right? The uncurious, incurious, I think it's incurious. The incurious manager who's doing what they're told or doing the thing they have done every time before is not looking at the actual situation. They're just following whatever their real orders are or the orders they give themselves in their heads. Being able to adapt to what's happening and bring both vision and practicality to it is crucial, and that's what people want to follow.
Amen and amen, Liz. I mean, that is when we are not, okay, I talk a lot about self-talk and the power of self-talk. We have conversations with ourselves more than we do with any other human being.
Yep.
So our self-talk has the ability more than anything else to diminish our curiosity, to shut us down, to keep us from the quest, the exploration, and frankly, the adventure of exceptional leadership. And so we can kibosh the opportunities that are right in front of us to maybe do something really cool and innovative because our human curiosity is at play when we let that self-talk talk us out of it. And so it's one of those things that I think every leader out there needs to be on guard about. Our self-talk can be very positive and powerful, but we need to be intentional about what we allow to play in our minds and how it drives the decisions that we make.
Yep. The job of our brain is to keep us safe.
Yes.
Okay, that's what the brain's trying to do. The interesting thing, exactly as you're saying, is that exceptional people understand that safety is not just of the moment, and therefore they've got the big goal or they've got the long-term vision, and so they don't back away as easily because they are, keeping their eye on the prize. They are looking at the horizon line.
Okay, there was one more thing when you were talking a few minutes ago that really tickled my mind. And it was when you just made a passing comment about the individual's thinking. And what I picked up on was the difference between exceptional leaders and maybe a mediocre manager is whether or not they're focused primarily on self-protection, self-grandizing, self-elevation, whatever that self piece might be, but they're more focused on that than they are on the greater good and on developing other people. I know too many of the leaders in my business coaching practice, when I first come in and start working with them, they're making fear-based decisions. And fear-based decisions make them even more self-protective. And so they're territorial with information. They micromanage. They don't empower people. And they don't allow for other people's creativity and curiosity to maybe take an approach that might go in a different direction than what they would have taken themselves, but would still arrive at the destination. So what are your thoughts about that as far as, thinking about self and that protection, that fear versus being more in tune with other people and supporting and encouraging that greater good?
I do think that we are all self-protective. I mean, we want to make sure we can carry on and work another day, fight another day, live another day, whatever it is. But there's a difference between self-protective, me, only myself now in the moment, as you were saying, and self-protective that I actually know it will be better for me if I take this risk, get everybody to come along with me, and we accomplish a fantastic thing. That's in some ways more protective of myself if I have the capability to see that. And there's an interesting analog in this example to mind-body reactivity. So when we're under threat, one of the things that happens is we lose our peripheral vision. If we believe we're under physical threat, our body is geared for fight or flight. And part of how we do that is by conserving all non-crucial energy and focusing just on how am I going to fight this impending threat or where am I going to run? And so one of the things that actually happens physiologically is that our vision narrows. Well, to make good decisions, that's often not helpful. When your vision narrows enough, all you see is yourself. So I don't know enough about, clinical psychology or any of that to say whether some of us are naturally more fearful or how we learn what to fear. But going back to the thing about patterned response, if our patterned response is to be afraid over and over and over, it's much harder to open your field of view. And that's why things like coaching are so helpful, because then you have a guide. And if you trust your coach, you are relying on your guide to help you see in a way you yourself are not seeing. Managers who micromanage, who are happy to keep their heads down, who are trying to avoid trouble, often don't want coaching. They want to stay in what they think is their safe little bubble. It's people who want to grow and expand that recognize that they can benefit from that extra vision.
That is so good. And even as I'm listening to you, I've had a bit of an epiphany. I've never thought about it this way precisely before. But when we are focused, and I'm going to say almost exclusively on self, because I agree. Look, in the human condition, we can't help but focus on self to a degree. Mm-hmm. And that is actually healthy as far as being a protectant. It's just when it becomes maximized, it becomes a weakness. But I've never considered before the fact that when we are, I'm going to put it this way, wallowing in fear, focusing almost exclusively on self, that's small thinking. It does narrow it down. But when we open ourselves up to other people, their ideas, giving them opportunities, encouraging them, and not being so afraid and hoarding and gripping information, then it opens us up and gives us a bigger view. So I absolutely love that. That's a great analogy. And so something else too, as we've been chatting here, Liz, is I often talk about and I think about strategy versus tactic. So I am naturally a visionary personality. I'm a certified personality trainer. So I do a lot of work and thinking about human personality and how that impacts what we do and why we do it. And so again, I was born extrovert, visionary type of a human being. But one of the things that I've learned through the years is I can train my brain. Just because I'm born a certain way does not mean that I'm stuck there, that I don't have the ability to gain talents and abilities through intentionality. And so I've worked on that. So even though I'm visionary by nature, I've worked very hard to be more tactical in my approach. And so paying attention, yes, to the big picture and never losing sight of that, but also paying close attention to the details along the way, the details necessary to make that vision become reality. And I think a lot of times leaders, either they don't realize or they lose sight of that ability they have to retrain their brain and not keep themselves stuck in the rut of thinking, well, this is just the way I am. Instead of understanding they can change that if they exercise intentional practices themselves. What are your thoughts about strategy versus tactics and some of what I just shared?
So I love that what you just raised is a way in which self-awareness leads to better leadership as opposed to closing down. Knowing what your strengths are and wanting to get some of other strengths and observing yourself in that process and seeing how you can grow, that's fantastic. And yes, there are many leaders who do what I call singing the I Gotta Be Me song. it is really a problem, and I think a marker of a kind of fixed mindset when anybody says, well, that's just the way I am. As soon as somebody says that, they're not only making a statement about themselves, they're making a statement about how they are approaching probably the feedback you've just given them. They've said, I can't really listen to you because it's contrary to my self-image. I don't have to listen to you because I'm successful this way. Marshall Goldsmith, the famous leadership coach, executive coach, one of his most popular books, and the title alone is so brilliant. The title is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Mm. And this is something that happens to many leaders because once they get used to the exercise of power and authority, they calcify in their own habits. There's that pattern thing again. What worked for me before, I'll just apply it. I'm thinking right now as an example of a guy who was hired as a senior vice president at one of my clients because he'd been very successful elsewhere. And he brought with him what he called his playbook. This is how we do it. And he applied his playbook, even though it was a different circumstance. And there were great things in his playbook. I mean, he was very effective at one point in his career and made some brilliant decisions. But they're no longer brilliant if you don't adapt them to the real circumstances you're in.
Yes, adaptability is a crucial factor for any exceptional leader. And You're right. Just because something worked, as you said, brilliantly in one set of circumstances does not mean that it's relative for the current situation. And as leaders, we have to constantly be evaluating that. So that is so good. Well, Liz, let's switch tracks a little bit. And so let me ask you this. If you were to identify what some of the more common crises or problems or turmoils are that you see in organizations you work with, what would some of those be?
Okay. So I'm thinking about the difference between what are the manifestations of these problems and what do they come from. You know, I get hired because people observe the manifestations. One example might be two departments at war with each other for years. Mm-hmm. And everybody has, team exercises and whatever, and then they go back and are just as terrible with each other. The problem is not necessarily that the people aren't getting along. It may be true that the people aren't getting along, but the real problem so often is a lack of clarity from senior leadership about what is expected and the quantity or nature of the tools, resources, and support that people actually need to get their jobs done. And this goes back to your point about strategy versus tactics. It is a fantastic thing for a leader to have a great idea and say, okay, team, this is what we're going to do. But if the leader doesn't understand what it takes and is not willing to change their mind based on the input of their staff who does know what it might take, then how can that leader expect that the real change will happen? It's unrealistic. This happens over and over and over. That is one of the most common kinds of problems. Shall I go on? I can give you,
yes, but let me just interject something, because as I'm listening to it, one, yes, and yes, I see the same thing in my coaching practice. We see conflict as the problem. Conflict is a symptom. And so one of the things that over the years of doing what I do, I found myself, no matter what business I went into or what type of industry it was, after a while, I identified 7 core, what I call invisible drains. So invisible drains are things that drain money, time, and energy from the organization and its people. And so it's just my own terminology. And I always remind people, invisible does not mean that you can't see it, but you may be avoiding or ignoring it. Or maybe it is just truly completely invisible to you. But I have determined there are 7 core invisible drains that anytime I go in to do coaching with a client, I know from the first day that I step across the threshold, I'm looking for these 7 core drains. And they are these. You put the words unclear and inconsistent in front of each one of them. So it's, yes. And you're going to understand why I'm going here. So the first one is unclear and inconsistent expectations. Then it's unclear and inconsistent communication, processes, training, customer care. And for that, I go to internal customers because in an organization, we're each other's customers at different times.
Yep.
But then also the external customer, obviously that person opening their bank account to do business with us. But then unclear and inconsistent accountability, and then unclear and inconsistent execution. And I find when I approach from that foundation that I can much more readily get to the true origin issues versus spending a lot of wasted time on symptoms instead of getting to that core problem. So that's why, I mean, what you were saying really triggered that for me because I see it over and over. And the first issue, and the reason I have them listed in that order is the first issue is always unclear and inconsistent expectations. And it almost always goes both ways.
That's just true. I mean, that's part of the human condition too. We're not good at explaining ourselves, and we all expect a certain amount of mind reading.
Yes. You know, I've been married for well over 25 years, and I can tell you that in the early years of my marriage, one of the biggest ongoing issues my husband and I had was we both had this subconscious expectation that the other should be able to read the minds. Well, that's not going to happen, but we carry that same type of thinking into our work relationships. We subconsciously, again, assume a lot about what other people understand about our expectations. And even deeper, sometimes we don't even understand our own expectations. And that causes its own issues.
Boy, is that the truth. I don't think it's just subconscious, though, Anita. I think it is a cultural norm, and there is an expectation, I'm thinking on the marital side, if you loved me, you would understand. And in the workplace, it's if you were committed, or if you cared about this goal, or if you wanted the kind of career that you say you want, you would understand, as opposed to just naturally thinking, well, this is a new and complex thing we need to do. Mm-hmm. So I'd better explain it really clearly because not everybody is having my thoughts. And exactly as you said, I had to argue with myself a few rounds before I figured it out. And this is part of when you talk about the drain of unclear or inconsistent communications. A second thing that I was going to say is something that happens all over. As soon as you have even just 3 people in an organization, is if 2 people come to a conclusion and then explain their conclusion to somebody else, they're often leaving out all the subtext, the history of how they got there, what their deepest concerns about it are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they just issue what sounds like a fiat. Now we're doing it this way. People need to understand enough backstory or enough detail to see what their place in the new approach is. They need more understanding at a deeper level. So whatever the initial statements about here's the change we're making are, they are never enough. Even if it looks like it comes out right, some of that is blind luck.
That is so true. I love your analogy about marriage versus are thinking as far as mind reading in the workplace as well. I mean, I'm literally just sitting here pondering, Liz, because this is so, so good. And if more leaders would be intentional to put focus and attention on clearing the air, on making sure that they are communicating those expectations and reiterating, clarifying. Another thing, so many leaders forget, or maybe they don't even know, that on average, people retain approximately 25% of what they hear verbally. So that means that we need to clarify, we need to repeat, we need to provide written documentation to support sometimes, depending on what the situation is. And the other thing is, so I'll use a little different terminology than what you use, but we're saying the same thing, is we need to make sure that we explain the why behind the what.
Yep.
When human beings understand why, they connect, and then they're like, okay, well then I can move forward. But when people don't understand the why, they get stuck in the confusion and their brains can't help but try to figure it out. And sometimes they'll make up their own why, and it's completely wrong, which then, by the way, can send them on a very incorrect path.
Yes, that is totally right. I would say they also need more understanding from what the leader means about the how. Because often, okay, so it's a big fallacy. We can't help ourselves, but we think other people are like us. Mm-hmm. And they are like us in terms of the moral value of their humanity, in terms of the basic needs for sustenance and compassion and all those things. We're all morally equal and valuable, etc. But we don't function the same way. We don't think the same way. And leaders often assume, oh, this will be clear. It's so obvious. Mm-hmm. How many times has a client said to you, but it's obvious?
Yes.
They should have known what I meant. But people are not the same. Your marriage example is exactly right. We think other people think the same way, and this is an expectations problem. We're deeply disappointed when they don't. We think it means they don't care about us. All it really means is they don't think the same way. And so the focus and attention that you're talking about, if we break it down and explain the way we think and how we came to the why, and then give details about the what, and have real discussion about the how, with a lot of room for participation, and leaders often don't have patience for that participation. But letting people share their own thoughts, their musings about how they might approach stuff, often leads to the most productive possible discussions. First of all, it warns, it's like sending up a flare if someone is facing in the wrong direction, made up the wrong why, has a different story. Otherwise, I like to say, you get exactly what you described. You've got a perfectly good drill making perfectly good holes, but in the wrong place. And then, if the leader continues the dialogue, it actually becomes a way of teaching the team how the leader does think. And it helps the team be more accurate in the future, not because they can mind read, but because their options or the odds of understanding become stronger. And so the questions they ask become more tailored to what the leader is really talking about, et cetera. And it's really a virtuous cycle.
That's so true. And one of the things that you really hit on there is you use the term dialogue, and many leaders don't understand about themselves that they really don't dialogue with their people, they monologue. Mm-hmm. They talk at people instead of having a conversation with people. I like to remind my clients often that I believe God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should be listening twice as much as we speak. And so many leaders, and I've observed this countless times, they'll ask someone a question. That person opens their mouth. They may even get a few words out before the leader interjects and starts telling them what they're thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, hello, that's not
Yeah.
going to lead to good results.
Yeah.
And it's not going to get you there any more efficiently or more quickly either. And so it's to the leader's benefit to open their ears and to ask more questions than talking at or over people. And if more leaders could understand that, if I could just take them by the shoulders and say, just get this, you're going to glean the results you want, not only faster, but you're going to get higher results. And you're going to get them more consistently.
There is a good book called Turn the Ship Around by a guy named David Marquette, Marquet, who was a Navy commander of a submarine, I want to say. I could be wrong in the details. But he learned that when he gave an order, there were more likely to be errors than when he involved people below him who learned to make their own decisions and only come to him when they had a problem. And not just to come to him with the problem, but to come with the problem expecting dialogue, that he was not going to solve it for them. They were going to do it together. It's a good read for just the kind of thing you're talking about.
Yes, I love that. I have not read that book. I'm going to have to look that one up. Well, Liz, let me ask you this. If you were mentoring a young leader, what are some crucial tips that you would offer them, and why these particular tips?
So one of the things that I actually do with young leaders is I say to them all the time, what do you think will happen if you do the thing you say you're going to do? What do you think will happen? What do you think you'll do? What do you think they'll do? What do you think will happen after that? Because in general, the people who are young leaders are highly intelligent, highly motivated. And so if you ask them a good leading question and you make sure they actually answer it, you don't just send them away with the question.
Yes.
You can see the mechanics of their thinking. And when you encourage them to think about it from somebody else's point of view, they start to identify the holes in their own approach. And you get them into a process of behaving in a curious way, even if they did not start out curious. What do you think will happen? Gee, I don't know. Well, let's make it up. And they learn to tell the story of things and to think about what are the consequences of this action, what is more likely to go wrong if something does, and if it were to go right, why would that have happened? What made it go right? What were the things that are likely to work? And they start to develop a larger portfolio of potential responses to situations. And they do not take for granted the idea that their own thought will always take care of whatever the problem is.
That's amazing advice. And I could just see how that would enrich and launch a young leader into exceptional habits. And especially, I'm sure you're aware of this, many of your highest performing athletes, they follow a practice where they repeatedly, over and over, they envision or imagine the outcome that they want to happen.
Yep.
And so I love what you're describing in conjunction with that practice, like making that an exercise where you imagine, and maybe for that leader, maybe even imagining different scenarios, but then as you said, going to the why. Why did this happen? And then possibly, how could we alter that? That's just brilliant, Liz.
Thank you. All I can say is it helps them think better. And I want to give you a tweak on using why questions. Something I've noticed is that when you use why questions after the fact, after the event has already occurred, people can get defensive because they feel like you're questioning their motives, you're questioning their smarts. They take it as, why would you do such a thing? As opposed to a neutral, how did this come to be? And so I have tried, I'm not perfect yet, but I have tried to train myself to ask more how and what questions. What was it that prompted you to do X? How do you think this happened? And then they are more in the factual world, thinking about real things that could have happened, instead of just self-questioning in a way that triggers their self-defensiveness.
Yeah, that's very insightful. I like that a lot. And I know for me, a lot of times what I will do to diffuse it and make sure that it doesn't feel like an attack, because some people do receive it that way, even though, as you said, you don't, that's not your intention, but is oftentimes to just put it on myself. So I would imagine if it were me, I would wonder, well, why did it happen that way? And so do you ever have that kind of thought processes? And if so, what comes to your mind? And I find by making it more about me and not asking them, well, why do you think that happened? It doesn't feel for them as if I'm pointing it or accusing in any way. But I think both of those approaches are really good. And I love focusing on the how and the what. It's fantastic.
Yep.
Well, Liz, this has been so good. I knew it was going to be a wonderful conversation, but so much better than I even could have imagined. So again, thank you very much for being on the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. And I want to make sure that our listeners can find out more about you. I know you have an ebook, newsletter, and blog. So tell our listeners where they can find you.
Thank you, Anita. The best place is actually to go to my website, which is lizkislik.com, Lizkislik. And there is an ebook. It's about the interpersonal aspects of conflict at work. And also, then you can get my newsletter. There's a monthly newsletter, and I have weekly blogs. And there's something like 12 years of content there about all aspects of work challenges, leadership challenges, team challenges. So there's plenty there. And of course, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And I just want to remind people too, like you have worked with many Fortune 500 companies. You do write for the Harvard Business Review, for Forbes. I mean, look, you're a gal who's got some chops. And so we need to make sure that we are plugging into all of the amazing information that you can help us with. And so leaders, go to Liz's website, read her workplace wisdom blog, get her free ebook, reach out to her. And if you need help in your organization, I know that Liz is like I am. There's not enough of us who do the kind of work that we do to go around. So find Liz, find me, find someone who can coach you, can guide you, and can open your mind to more possibilities and help you believe more in your own potential, and who will hold you accountable so that you'll actually execute, because that's what good coaching is. So just make sure that every day you are challenging yourself to be exceptional. Utilize the resources that are available to you, such as Liz's. But don't let your guard down, and don't let yourself fall prey to mediocre management. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. There's magic in meeting with an objective, and I always have an objective for you, not only in these episodes, but also from the other resources I offer on my website, anitabrooks.com. That's ANITABROOKS.com. There you'll find information on digital courses, webinars, books, workbooks, Of course, my in-person P4 power coaching for businesses and organizations. And if you need a speaker for your conference or your strategic retreat, I'm your gal. But I'm also excited to let you know about a new service that we're offering. For less than half the price of a daily Starbucks latte for a month, you can join our P4 Power Coaching community. This is a monthly membership where you'll get insider tips. And you'll also be able to join our monthly Zoom meetings that are one part strategy sessions, one part mastermind, one part networking, one part coaching. I can promise you'll not only learn from me, but you'll learn from others in the group. We'll also have monthly webinars as part of the P4 Power Coaching community, and we'll have coaching resources and exercises. And you'll get first opportunities and special offers for many of the other things that we have to offer. And of course, you will get leadership encouragements. The P4 Power Coaching community is all about growth, success, and celebrating our wins. And remember, it's never too late for a fresh start with fresh faith. So embrace your exceptional leadership impact with fresh resolve to make the difference you were made for.